Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here for Bitcoin Magazine's Halving live stream event. I think it's wonderful to be celebrating yet another milestone on Bitcoin's trajectory. I wanted to talk to you about why freedom matters, and I wanted to lay out a concept that I believe in, whereby freedom comes in three dimensions. And it comes in a dimension of open government, a dimension of open information, and a dimension of open money. And that third dimension is what we're celebrating today. But I want to give the full context for everybody as to why I believe that these three dimensions kind of work together to provide people the empowerment that they're eventually going to need to escape what I otherwise view as an inevitable, inexorable drift into a techno dystopian surveillance state. So when you take this first dimension of open government, or we can call it decentralized government, democracy, this is a tool, a technology that humans invented to basically decentralize power away from a tyrant or a tyranny or the feudal system or a military dictatorship or a kingdom or any sort of political power structure where all the power is in the hands of one person or a small group of people. All humans used to live under such a structure. And ever since Cleisthenes in ancient Greece came up with the idea that we should be ruled by rules as opposed to being ruled by rulers, we've been chipping away at this idea of getting towards an open government that is decentralized. And it's amazing to say that, now 2000 plus years later, close to half the world lives under a relatively open government. And what I mean by that is a government that has checks and balances and where there isn't arbitrary power, where, for example, there's an executive branch, a judicial branch, a legislative branch, where the military is under some sort of civilian control, where there's a free press, where there are civil society organizations and nonprofit groups, and they're all kind of competing with each other. Different lobbies and special interests, and all these things are kind of competing with each other, and no one has absolute power. And that's a very healthy system for humans. I believe that if you look at any sort of statistical relationship between things like peace or health or innovation or patent rates, you will find that you'll be wanting to live in the South Koreas and not the North Koreas. You're going to want to live in the Estonias and not the Belaruses, the Costa Ricas and not the Cubas. This is something that is just universally observable on our planet. It has nothing to do with your ethnicity or where you come from or the language you speak. Universally, humans do better in open societies. And we've made incredible strides in that first dimension of freedom. The second dimension of freedom that I want to lay out is basically this idea of open information. Now, information used to also be very closed and centralized, meaning go back a few thousand years, if you wanted to learn everything about the world, you had to be elite. You had to get let into a library. You had to have credentials to go learn and time and resources. Now, the printing press was a big game changer in that people were able to more cheaply and without needing to belong to a certain class, start to spread their opinions to other people. And over time, we developed other kinds of technology, like the radio and the television. These were still very centralized, but they started to kind of democratize information. And it was only more recently that we've really been able to see the kind of blossoming of the democratization of information and the opening of information with basically the internet. So in the last few decades, we've seen the evolution of information bring us to the point where the average human has access to all of the world's knowledge in their pocket. That's really the lesson and the incredible legacy of the evolution of open information. Everybody's got a voice now. Everybody has access. It's not perfect, but it's way better than living under a closed information environment where all you have is propaganda and you aren't able to speak your own voice. So we've made really big strides as humans in these first two dimensions of freedom with regard to open government and open information. However, now we stand at the brink, at the precipice of the third dimension of freedom, and that's monetary freedom when we talk about open money. And we have been led to believe that the way that the world works is that we need bureaucrats and authorities to be in charge of the financial system, that it is responsible for them to do so, that they'll make good decisions on our behalf. And I think at best, the track record for this is very mixed. Yes, you can argue that Western governments and advanced economies have had central bankers that have presided over enormous growth over the last few decades. That is pretty indisputable. However, for most people on this planet, the 4.3 billion plus who live under dictatorships and authoritarian regimes, and for those people in these 95 countries, their experience with the monetary system has been subpar. They deal with the devaluations of their currency, destruction of their savings, financial repression, freezing of their bank accounts, general lack of infrastructure, favoritism when it comes to where the money that's printed, where does it go? And all of these things exist also in some way in Western societies as well, but they're extremely pronounced in authoritarian societies. You see a lot more things happen like hyperinflation or sovereign debt defaults, things like that. Now, we haven't really seen that in Western society so much in recent history. And I think we've been very sheltered from that because the folks in charge of our money system in some ways are able to export some of the pain and suffering to other countries. We don't know how long this fiat system is going to last. I have a personal view that governments will always issue debt. I think we're always going to be dealing with some sort of fiat money in the world. But this idea of closed, centralized money that is controlled by a small group of people, whereby the vast majority of people can get cut out of certain things and can get fenced off, I think that time is coming to an end. And I think Bitcoin represents the birth of a new era of monetary freedom, where, yes, if you're rich, you can have more Bitcoin than other people. If you're more productive, you can have more Bitcoin than other people. However, even if you're really wealthy, you won't be able to stop anyone else from getting access to Bitcoin. You won't be able to censor anybody else's transaction or confiscate their funds. So it doesn't bring equality of outcome, which I think is largely a myth, but it does bring us closer to monetary equality of opportunity. And that's such an incredible innovation in our history. We finally have a monetary system, even though it's just being born and only a tiny fraction of humans have learned about it and have started to engage with it. You know, we're at about 1% to 2% of the world, and that's not a bad start. You know, we're starting to get there. And what they've seen, those of them who are really in it and have really learned about what Bitcoin is that it's, again, a system that's open for business for everybody. It's totally permissionless. You don't need ID to use it. There's no such thing as needing a Bitcoin account. You know, you don't need a passport, or you don't need to belong to a particular nation state, or you don't have to belong to a particular religion or ethnicity or class to use it. Anyone can use it in the world. And it's a tremendous equalizing force. And to me, I believe that in the future, hundreds of years from now, humans will look back in time at our little bubble of the last couple hundred years, and they'll look at it as a curiosity of a time when, again, a small group of bureaucrats kind of ran the money system. In the same way that we today, hopefully a lot of us look back and say, oh, dictatorship, that's a really funny way of doing things, or centralized information and propaganda. That's a really, you know, outdated way of doing things. Like, we have a new way of doing things now. We know that open government and open information are better for humans. We thrive under these things. It allows us to collaborate more, innovate more, allows us to thrive and achieve. And I believe that over the next 100 years, people will really start to see Bitcoin in the same way, as the same sort of tool as the internet was for information, and as the same sort of tool that democracy has been for opening up government and ending the monopoly of political power, and ending the monopoly of, you know, information. In the same way, we're ending the monopoly of control of money and sort of the means of production of money is ending in the same way that the means of production of information and political power have been sort of eroded and chipped away. So to me, freedom comes in these three dimensions. I'm obviously, as a human rights advocate, a student of the first two first. But over the last few years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to learn from so many of you all about this third dimension, and to honestly just get very excited about it, because I see what it can do as a tool for people around the world who are stuck under repression of different kinds. And I think that it's going to be this amazing empowerment tool for them to get out from under this weight of repression. And again, I don't think it's a panacea, in the same way that democracy is not a panacea and the internet's not a panacea. Democratic governments can still do bad things, as we've seen. The internet can still be used for bad things, and Bitcoin will still be used for bad things, but it'll totally change the structure of the way that money works, in the same way that in a democracy, the elected rulers may do bad things, but we have this like architecture in place where we can boot them out if we don't like them, or we can criticize them in the media, and we, the people, can like change policy by pushing back. Same thing with information. The newspapers that sort of dominate the information landscape may say one thing, but now people can kind of push back and have their alternative narratives. So again, like, people who have the most money in certain ways will still sort of control the world in many different aspects, but the people will be able to be in many ways in charge of the rule set. It will all be equal in the eyes of the law, which has never happened before when it comes to money in human history. Even when we were under some sort of metallic standard, people who had more gold, obviously were powerful and, could make the rules more than people who didn't. All of a sudden, we are entering a new age. And I believe that Bitcoin will sort of complement these other two ideas and come together in a very beautiful trinity. So with that, I'm excited to contribute to today's programming and to celebrate another halving. Thanks so much for having me.